Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for today's Lunch and Learn with the Doctor, supporting academic success in your child by understanding developmental disabilities. My name is Kathy Chern, and I am a consumer health librarian at East Brunswick Public Library. Today's program is brought to you by St. Peter's University Hospital and the library's Just for the Health of It initiative to promote community health and wellness. Our speaker today is Naveen Mehrotra, MD, MPH. Dr. Mehrotra is a board-certified pediatrician at St. Peter's University Hospital. Dedicated to child development and early intervention, Dr. Mehrotra is also the founder and medical director of My Whole Child Pediatrics, a multi-physician, multi-location pediatric practice. His practice philosophy utilizes his interest in complementary and alternative medicine to bring an integrated approach to improving a child's health. Please be aware that this talk is being recorded. Participants' microphones are automatically muted and webcams off. When ready, the recording will be available at eepl.org/YouTube. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. Our speaker will answer questions at the end of the talk. Our speaker will not be able to offer medical advice to attendees during this program. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Dr. Mehrotra.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for having me here. And thank you, Crystal and Tab from St. Peter's, to arranging this talk on supporting academic success in your child by understanding developmental disabilities. And as Kathy mentioned, we'll be going through an overview and trying to understand what developmental disabilities are all about. And then the questions will be taken at the end. So without further ado, I know it is lunchtime for all of you guys. So thank you for attending and trying to understand a little bit about more of our kids. So as you saw in this little cartoon video, right, a child who may not be functioning well or who may not be succeeding well academically may have all of these thoughts, and especially with other kids that are around him or her, they start to feel that they may be stupid, they may be dumb, they're just not able to go ahead and succeed. And as we pediatricians know, and as parents know, all of the kids really want to succeed. And sometimes it's just out of their control. And no matter how hard they try, they're just not able to go ahead and succeed until we identify what those issues are and then help them and support them in achieving that academic success. So as we saw in here, right, we might have been faced with this in our own childhood. We might have kids that we are aware of, you know, really not paying attention. These kids are just not sitting still. They're struggling with their reading, math, or writing. They're getting anxious or stressed. They're starting to lose track of things. They have frequent meltdowns. They get frustrated and angry very, very quickly. And, you know, we think as parents that the kid just doesn't want to go ahead and study. The kid wants to go out and play, but the kid is getting frustrated and angry because they're not able to achieve what they internally would like to achieve. So when we look at this, is the child really being lazy, or is there another problem? And that's where understanding and patience as a parent and supporting our kids becomes key. And we really could be dealing with a learning disability rather than the child just not wanting to go ahead and study. So at each age group, there are some red flags that we need to look at. All right. So when you go into the pediatrician's office and you're getting your well checks, These are some of the things that you may need to bring up, or the pediatrician would be asking you. So is the child really having problems pronouncing words? Are they having a hard time finding the right words? Are they learning the alphabets, the numbers, the colors, the shapes? Are they having difficulty following directions or learning the routines? Are they having difficulty controlling their pencils or their crayons or coloring within the lines? Are they having trouble telling time and remembering sequences? Are they slow to learn new skills? So as the kid gets a little bit older and goes into grade school, are they still having that issue about connecting letters and sounds? Are they confusing basic words? Are they making consistent reading and spelling errors? Are they confusing arithmetic signs? Are they slow to remember facts? Are they slow to learn new skills? Are they unable to go ahead and have that pencil grip? Do they have poor coordination? Is there trouble learning about time? So these look like a lot of different red flags, but we have to take it in perspective. So as the kid gets a little bit older and goes into elementary school, are they having issues with letter sequencing? Are they slow to learn root words, prefixes, other spelling strategies? Are they avoiding reading aloud? Is it just because they don't know how to read and they want to shy away from that? Are they having trouble with word problems? Are they having difficulty with handwriting? And they are having very slow or poor recall of facts? And eventually, are they having difficulty making friends? Are they having a trouble finding, expressing themselves? And if it doesn't get picked up there, red flags in high school students. Are they avoiding reading and writing? Are they having trouble summarizing? Are they having trouble with open-ended questions? Are there weak memory skills? Are they working very slowly? Are they having a poor grasp of abstract concepts? And if it gets missed there, even in adulthood, as an adult, are we having difficulty reading comprehensions? Are we having trouble with open-ended test questions and word problems? We're not able to generate answers. Do we dislike reading and writing? Do we have very poor organizational skills? Once again, poor handwriting. So doesn't this sound like all of us at one time or another? I can say, yeah, I'm very disorganized, or I don't like to read, or I don't like to, or I'm not able to understand how to put words together or how to extract the information after I read. So what we need to identify is, are these red flags persistent, or are they just one odd time? Okay, maybe I'm tired today, I'm stressed out today, so I wasn't able to do it. But consistently, is there an issue with the child? And secondly, what we have to understand is, was there not enough stimulation and education that had been provided for the child or person to learn? So if the parent is not sitting there and teaching the child or reading with the child, or the child is not in an academic environment, they may not have enough stimulation or learning that would give them the tools to be able to do those things. So we have to first then look at the overall environment. So if we're looking at this, we want to understand the learning process. How do we learn? There are 4 stages in learning and information processing. First, input, getting information into the brain, right? Integration, how do we organize and make sense of this information? Let's say we get the information, are we not able to put it together? Storage, right? So once the information comes in, the information has to stay in the brain, and we have to be able to retrieve that information. And then finally, the output, getting the information back out. So if we break this down and look at this into a little bit more detail, you'll start to understand how and where these deficiencies might be coming in. So when we are talking about input, information perceived through the senses, It may be associated with sequencing and processing time intervals. So if the child is not able to see properly, right? The child is not able to recognize the things that need to be recognized. So he has those visual perception defects. So if I was to take a scenario here, even in my case, when I was in kindergarten and I was at school, back then we didn't have these iPads, and the teacher would write everything on the blackboard. I would go ahead and copy those things down, and I would get them all wrong because I had a visual defect. I needed glasses, and I was not able to recognize what the teacher was writing. And after I started to fail in so many of those, day-to-day basics, that's when the antennas went up and said, hey, could there be a visual defect? And yes, when I went to the eye doctor and got my glasses, everything was fine and I started to do well. Auditory perception defects. Are there, is there some sort of a hearing issue that the child has, which they're not able to go ahead and understand what is being told to them? Are they not able to get the sound that is needed for understanding the instructions? Tactile inputs. So we have inputs on visual, auditory, tactile. So are there issues with how the child is touched, how the child feels, how the child has sensations that are causing him or her to not be able to get the right information? So once the information comes in and we have none of those defects, then how is the integration being done? So the input is interpreted, categorized, placed in a sequence, or related to previous learning. And this is what our wonderful brain does. So are there issues in the brain that are not letting the child integrate the information that the child brings in? So how do we start to identify those? That the child is not able to tell the story in a correct sequence. The child is not able to memorize sequences of information. The child is able to understand new concept, but unable to generalize it to other areas of learning. They can't see the big picture. So, you might have stored all of this information, and when you get new information, you see how those two pieces of information are put together, and is the child able to go ahead and do that? So the child is able to understand that 1 + 1 is equal to 2, but are they really able to go ahead and do it in terms of the integration that comes in? So storage. So once that information is there, are they able to store that information? So you have short-term memory, you have long-term memory, you have working memory, which is how we remember many, many different things that might have happened years and years ago. So what we learned as a kid really stays with us. But if we have a problem with memory, we may not be able to recall a lot of that. So when there is a memory issue, you'll have difficulty learning new material without much, much more repetitions than usual. So the child has to go ahead and keep on trying to go ahead and say, okay, well, 1 + 1 is 2, or 2 × 2 is 4, and 2 × 2 is 4, and 2 × 2 is 4, and 2 × 2 is 4. So they may need to have to repeat that 20 times, whereas another kid might have to do it only 2 times. So difficulties with visual memory can impede learning to spell as well. So all of these pieces of information that I'm giving you is for you to get an understanding of how information is processed and why a child may not succeed academically. So output. So you've been able to absorb the information, you have it in your working memory, you've been able to integrate that, and now you need to go ahead and bring it out, right? You need to be able to go ahead, and if you are to talk, you need to be able to put it into words, right? So difficulty in information output will create problem with spoken language. So difficulty answering a question on demand, which involves retrieval of information from storage, organization, and putting it into words, right? So there's many different processes that happen when somebody says, hi, how are you? And if you have a defect in any of those those subsections that we've talked about, you may not be able to say, oh, I'm fine, how are you? So the brain output, the gesturing, the writing and or drawing, the deficits can cause problems in many different aspects. So if the child has a fine motor defect, they may have difficulty with their handwriting. The child may have gross motor defects, might have issues with running, may be unable to ride a bike, and so on. So difficulty becomes an obstacle for the child to learn. A learning difficulty is difficulty in acquiring skills and knowledge to the normal level expected to those of the same age. It's usually due to external factors and affects or substantially affects a person's ability to learn and get along with others. So right now we're talking about learning difficulties as opposed to a disability, which we'll get into a little bit later in this conversation. So there are many different external factors which can lead to learning difficulties. As we touched on, inadequate or inappropriate teaching. If the child has not been taught the alphabets or has not been taught how to put words together, has not been taught how to read, the child is not going to have those skills, right? Let's say the child is in a classroom environment which is not conducive to their learning. The child may not perform. And as soon, if they're really scared of their teachers, if there's some bullying that's going on, something or another that's making the child stressed out, making the child scared, that child is going to have a lot of learning difficulties. Socioeconomic disadvantages, poor relationships, poor school attendance, right? There's something going on at home. The child has not been able to attend school. The child is not going to have the skills or is not going to get the education that they need. Learning through medium of a second language. A lot of our students in this area, right, the melting pot in the New York, New Jersey area have English as a second language. They may not be able to learn properly, right? So socio-emotional issues, anxiety, depression, stress, trauma. So any condition that affects the child's concentration can make learning more of a challenge. So if we differentiate that the child has a difficulty and we are able to identify the stress factor that's causing the difficulty, that can usually be taken care of if we work at it, right? There are certain things that you may not be able to take care of, which are out of our control. But then there are things that are inherent to the child, and that is what is called a disability. So something that incapacitates and may need specialized or extra help to manage and bring the child up to speed where they need to be. So learning disabilities were identified, and the exact definition was laid out, where a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. Oh my God, lots of words you don't need to understand or need to go ahead and memorize this. So there's multiple aspects to a learning disability which need to be identified so that the treatment can be done for the child. So we talked about learning difficulties, which are external factors that hopefully we can take care of. And then you have learning disabilities, and specific learning disabilities are what we're going to get into next. So factors that are leading to learning disabilities, it could run in the family, right? So, the father spoke late, so now the child is not, is speaking late. A lot of times we'll go ahead and write that off as such a hereditary thing that runs in the family, right? There might have been something that happened right at the time of birth. There might have been prematurity, some other medical factor that did not allow the child to develop. Medical concerns, medical conditions, thyroid disorders, lead intoxications, visual problems. Then there's developmental disabilities. And then you have emotional behavioral challenges, ADHD, anxiety, depression, mental retardation, social communication disorders. So multiple medical reasoning that can cause learning disabilities. So learning difficulties can be handled by modifications. Learning disability is a significant lifelong condition that starts before adulthood and continues to affect the way one deals with information. So learning disabilities cannot be attributed primarily to mental retardation, cultural difference, or environmental or economic disadvantage. And people with learning disability really may not have any issue with intelligence. They're not dumb or lazy. It's just that their brain is wired differently. So one of the common ones that you might have seen or heard about is something called dyslexia. So the child is not able to read or not able to identify because of a learning disability called dyslexia. So you might be able to see this word as teapot, but if you look at all of these other ways that the child might be able to see what you're seeing as teapot, it's not going to make any sense, right? So there are multiple ways here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things that he is seeing which do not equal to teapots. So if the child is not able to recognize the word, how are they going to go ahead and do something that's meaningful by what we expect them to do? So reading disorder is the most common learning disability, accounting for 70 to 80% of learning disabilities. Developmental dyslexia is often used as a synonym. So the child is not able to decode the word properly. The child is not able to recognize the word properly. The child is not able to comprehend what they are reading. Dysgraphia. So if you look at this, right, how the child is writing, how the child is reading what they have written. I don't know how many of you on this talk can actually go ahead and understand what is written here. And this is an issue where if the child is not able to read what they have written, they're not going to be able to understand what is needed to be done. So writing skills that fall substantially below those expected based on the individual's chronological age and age-appropriate education. So deficits could include grammar punctuation errors, can be poor paragraph organization, spelling errors, really poor penmanship. And if sensory deficits are present, it must exceed what would be expected. So if a child has glasses, or is the child not able to hear properly, or has some other issues, are they, when that's corrected, is the child able to write normally, or are they not able to write normally still after correcting the deficit? Dyscalculia. So errors with or understanding or poor understanding of mathematics, right? So they're not able to understand what mathematical tables are about. Numbers, as you see, are just all jumbled up and just really not understanding the basic mathematics concepts. So they have very poor number sense. They have a deficit in understanding time, quantity, difficulty memorizing math facts, difficulty organizing numbers, and understanding how problems are organized. So those were some of the common learning disabilities, but then there are other medical disorders that can affect learning. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The child is just so hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive, disorganized, having frequent emotional outbursts, frustrated over minor issues. If the child can't sit still, can't stay focused, can't follow directions and stay organized, they really can't complete their class or homework well. Another common disorder that can impact learning is autism. So affects learning by interfering with communication, reading body language, learning basic skills, making friends and making eye contact. And I'm sure all of you are well aware, the prevalence is very high, about 1 in 68 children identified with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, in 2010. It varies widely by community. Most children were not even diagnosed until after age 4, and there is a gender difference, much more common in boys. So children with ASD not necessarily had any impact to their IQ, and there was a population difference in terms of ethnic background, where Black and Hispanic children were more likely than white to have been identified with intellectual disabilities as opposed to autism. So why is it important to identify, is there a learning difficulty? Is there a learning disability? Or, what's going on? Is the child just lazy, right? So what we know about the brain in the developing child is something called neuroplasticity. It's the brain's natural ability to change. So if we make the diagnosis of a specific learning disability and place the child in the right learning condition, the brain has the ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections and starts to rewire so that we can try to get the child as normal as possible and try to mainstream them into regular schools. And obviously, role of a pediatrician is to understand the child and to have a complete history, right? So birth history for risk factors, any past medical history, evaluating the development of the child, how's the child doing in school? What are the deficiencies in school? What is the social history like? Definitely doing a complete physical and neurological exam and making sure that developmental screening is done at those well visits that happen on a regular basis at your pediatrician's office. So if we identify that there is something that's possibly wrong, what do we do, right? So we've taken care of the learning difficulty aspect. We've tried to optimize the learning environment for the child, but still the child is not progressing the way we want them to. So at this point, we contemplate that there may be a learning disability. So we would have to go ahead and refer them for further assessment. This can be done through a neurodevelopmental pediatrician. It can be done through a pediatric neurologist. It can be done through a child psychiatrist. It can be done through a neuropsychologist. And many schools have a child study team that might be able to go ahead and evaluate the child as well. So any child that's less than 3 years of age would, from birth to 3 years of age, they would go into an early intervention assessment. And every area that you live in has an early intervention team that is funded through the state that would go ahead and assess the child. So if a parent feels that their child is delayed, if the pediatrician tells them that their child is delayed, the first thing that a parent needs to do is to call the early intervention number and tell them so that they can go ahead and do an assessment on that child. So any child that's between 3 and 5 years of age, the school district might help for development of an individualized family service program. And any child that's greater than 5 years of age, the school district will do the assessment and develop what's called an individualized educational program. So the diagnosis of the specific learning disability can be independent. You can go to any of those specialists that I talked about, or it can be done by the school if they have a full child study team. So you can have a child study team that will do different types of testing. They can do psychological testing, they'll do educational testing, they might do occupational therapy assessment, physical therapy assessment, speech assessment, audiology assessment, and definitely looking at social history. Ooh, all of these tests are available, right? So you have psychological tests, multiple tests, you have achievement tests, you have speech tests, you have OT tests, and the list is tremendous. So I've laid this out for you to know that there are many different types of testing that are out there which will evaluate the child on different aspects. And once that is done, that's when all of this gets put in together to come up with a treatment plan. So, we talked about IQ, right? So IQ, many parents say, oh, my kid has got a great IQ. He's not stupid. He's not this, he's not that. I've laid out the normal range of IQs, but IQ doesn't necessarily mean, or if there's a deficit in IQ, doesn't necessarily mean there's a learning disability or vice versa. So, I think many of us as parents get very scared. Oh my God, my kid is retarded, or my kid is stupid. Sorry for using these terms, but that's what we hear from many parents, and that's what they're thinking. But what we have to make sure that we do is, assess the child from all angles and aspects and embrace the child. They're our kid, and we go ahead and move forward by figuring out what the deficiencies are and then giving them the right environment. So we diagnose and treat the medical neurological conditions, we evaluate the child's needs, and we decide on an educational and rehabilitation approach for that kid. And this is going to be a team effort, right? So it'll involve your doctor, it'll involve your educators, it'll involve your counselors and therapists that will then go ahead and put this plan together for your child. So if we go back into history and we look at how, the whole field about disabilities education came about and what the progress has been, back in 1975 is really when we started to see some of the legal actions happening, and some of the major landmarks that happened at 1986, 1998, and in 2004. So in 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act went ahead and ensured assessment and intervention for children 5 years of age and above. In 1986 is when they started to actually provide this assessment and intervention as a suggested for children under 5 years of age, and talking about the early intervention program. And then in 1998 was when this actually started mandating assessments and screening and providing the skills, the support that the child needed starting from birth on. So there are many different aspects to all of the IDEA acts that are there, the laws that have been put into place, where the state and the federal agencies work together to support the system and make sure that all children get educated despite their disabilities. So you can have an educational placement if there is something that is classified. You have a learning disability, you have autism, you have multiple disabilities, you have mental retardation, any of those, they would possibly put into a self-contained class, which may be combined with co-teaching classes and mainstreaming that child as quickly as possible. This may offer them extended school years. It may offer speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling. So a full treatment plan is put together for this child that has been classified as having some sort of a disability. There are others without classification. So you can have something called an intervention and referral service, which might, the child might get pulled out for certain classes. They might have in-class support. Then you have Section 504, which provides extra time for the kids to do their work. It might require specialized accommodations that are given to the child to perform much better. So let's say if the child is getting distracted with a noisy classroom, or the child has a little bit of a difficulty decoding words, they might be put into a section 504 where they get maybe a time and a half. So instead of 60 minutes, they get 90 minutes to go ahead and do the exam. Or they might be put into a quiet room. If they're having writing difficulties, they might be able to get a scribe that goes ahead and writes for them. But once again, we have to identify what are the needs of the child and how we can go ahead and advocate as the child's caretaker to make sure that we optimize the environment for the child to succeed. And most importantly, the rule is that no child should be left behind. So all children are entitled to free public education with added service to be delivered in the least restricted environment and to mainstream them whenever possible. So that ends my presentation, and hoping that many of you that are on this webinar are able to understand that if your child is having a difficulty, it may be due to external factors that we may need to look into, or there really might be a disability that the child has that needs to be addressed. And I don't think any child wants to not succeed. They always want to go ahead and ensure that their parents, their caretaker, are proud of them, and that they are, when they look at other kids in the school, they want to do better. And I think, when we start giving these names, oh, the kid is just lazy, it just wants to play, there may be something else that's going on. And as parents, we have to have our antennas up and make sure that we approach it in the correct manner. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to bring you this overview. And at this point now, we would go ahead and open it up to questions, if there are any. And even subsequently after the presentation is done fully, if you have any questions, you can reach us through any of our locations, through our website, or through email, so I can try to get those answers to you. So thank you very much. And at this point, I think I'll turn it back over to Catherine. Kathy.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dr. Mehrotra. So if anyone has any questions, please type them into the chat box. And as a reminder, the doctor can't provide medical advice to attendees during this program. And then I did receive a question: how does tech and remote learning affected learning and development during COVID compared to in-class learning?
Right. So this has been a challenge for a lot of the kids, because when they were doing remote learning, they were not able to get that strict environment where they were focused on an educator that was giving them the education. So what we saw was kids were sitting on the screen, but actually goofing off with learning, going on different other websites, the parents were busy doing their work, and a lot of the kids did falter because of that and didn't perform well. So that's one aspect of it just during COVID. And I think now that a lot of the kids are back in school, their learning is more effective. But on the flip side, there were many kids that did exceptionally well learning remotely, and they liked the home environment, which was safe for them. So it's a hit or miss for all of the kids. And what we do know in terms of technology, this is the second part of the question, I think, is that technology does limit the social interaction. So when kids are on screen time, they don't learn as much about social and emotional development in terms of how to communicate with other peers, how to respond appropriately. So we want to go ahead and minimize screen time and increase human interaction so that kids will learn a lot more and and not be deficient on their social development.
This person has a 4-year-old that is not in a school setting yet, but she has problems with instructions. So is there any advice on how to help?
Sure. So we have to, as we went through the information processing, right? Why is she having difficulty in terms of following instructions? Is there some sort of an input deficiency? Is she not able to hear properly? Is there some problem with processing the information? And is there an issue with the output that the child is doing? So is this behavioral? Is this an actual learning difficulty? So that has to be differentiated. So this would require a little bit more of a dialogue from the person who has generated this question, and their pediatrician would be the best person to discuss this to figure out, is this really just a behavioral issue? Why is the child not learning or not following instructions? Or is there a learning difficulty here? So I can speak to them offline if need be. So, you can pass that information on to me, or they can follow through with their pediatrician who probably knows the child much better.
Okay, thank you. And then what about when there are no academic issues yet, but some attention and executive function issues that are concerning? Do you just wait for an academic low performance?
No. We need to intervene as early as possible. So whenever there's a red flag of a child not conforming to what they should be doing, is a red flag for a parent to bring that to medical attention so that it can be assessed properly and identified if something else needs to be done. So we're talking about a 4-year-old who's rambunctious, who's all over the place, maybe. Could this be hyperactivity? Could this be ADHD? We need to identify that.
Yeah. So let me see the next question. If there is split time between parents, how does it affect disability, especially if parents are not on the same page?
It is an unfortunate situation because when both parents are not on board with trying to optimize the environment for the child will suffer. And I hope that both parents can look beyond their personal differences and look at the benefit for the child and ensure that the child does well. Because if the child is in one school location in 1 week and in another school location in another week, and you have all of the specialized services that have been set up at one school, and the child has gelled well with their team, and then you put them into another environment, the child does not have all of those services, the child will start to fall behind the weeks that the child is with the other parent.
Okay. And then another question, this person works at a pre-K and they have some children who have a referral for some kinds of these tests, and just want to know if the hospital offers these services.
So the neurodevelopmentalist that's there would be administering some of those tests. But unfortunately, as I said, the demand right now, unfortunately in society, is so great that the waiting time might be much, much more. So, trying to reach out to multiple different providers who can do those testing and getting your child in as quickly as possible is the way to go.
Okay. Are there specific self-contained classes for ASD children, or do they get mixed at a preschool level?
It'll vary case to case. So this is where you would need to speak to the child study team. You would need to be a strong advocate for your child when that IEP meeting happens, so that you can ensure that whatever the child needs is being offered through the school. And I think that whole process of creating the IEP, of being a special needs parent and ensuring that you're advocating for the needs of the child, because nobody knows the child better than a parent. And that has to be taken into account because you're with the child 24/7, right? The child goes into the school environment, the child may go in for an assessment for a short period of time, and that may not be the total amount of time that's needed to really understand the child. So it'll vary case to case, but if you think that certain things are needed, please speak up with the school that your child is at and advocate, and definitely speak to your provider.
Another question, what causes lack of learning in low income or below, and how can this change? The child brain has the ability to create new connections when in the right learning environment. This is important for creating future leaders in all aspects of populations.
Thank you so much for bringing this issue up. This is a much bigger societal issue when we talk about social determinants of health, and we believe that you know, if let's say the parent has not been educated or does not have an interest in reading, the child is going to model behavior that's given to them by the parent. So we talk about this on all aspects in terms of eating, in terms of reading, in terms of education, in terms of how they have their educational goals. All of that is mimicked, is modeled by the parent. So the parent, does not matter in what socioeconomic status they're in, if they read to their child, if they teach their child whatever basic understanding they have about education, about reading, the child will gravitate towards that in the early years and develop that interest that needs to be had in the long term.
And then, is it possible for a child to sustain brain damage from falling down the stairs as a toddler? At the time, there were no visible injuries.
Yes, it's possible, but typically, once again, it depends on the age of the child and how big the fall was, and if their skull has totally closed or not. If they're so multiple things have to be looked at, and you know, how the child progressed after the fall and who was observing the child for those for that time frame. So I think that would have to be looked into on a case-to-case basis. Not that common where a child would have sustained an injury from a fall, which would then manifest years later. It can happen, and I don't know the numbers of what percentage, but definitely I think whenever a child has a fall, you need to speak to your medical provider to figure out if there could be something much more dangerous.
And another question, how will critical race theory impact the development and learning for children in the future?
I'm not well versed in this, but I think from what I understand, based on what I've been told right now, is this is more so on the social side. And I think in terms of learning, how an individual child learns is not necessarily going to be impacted by the critical race theory that's being taught to them. So what we're talking about is learning disability based on a developmental delay of some sort that a child has. So I don't think that would impact in here.
Okay, so that is it for questions. So I want to say thank you again, Dr. Mehrotra, for taking all this time to present on this topic, for providing this great overview, and for answering all of our questions. And we have a upcoming talk with St. Peter's University Hospital in November on autoimmune diseases on Friday, November 5th at 12 p.m. noon. So for more information or to register, go to ebpl.org/calendar. So thank you everyone for joining us, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day. Bye-bye.